Good morning, Texas. How are you doing today? I see many of you are rolling in as we're about to begin. I'm joined this morning with Jonathan Roach from Roach and Associates, and hopefully you're more awake than my computer, which did not want to connect this morning. So I apologize for being a few minutes late. Looks like you're now settling in. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So how are we doing today?
Fantastic on my end, Mac. Thanks.
All right. Well, good morning. Okay, it looks like most folks are rolling in, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and kick it off and get started. I apologize again for being a few minutes late. Today, we've got some experts here, Jonathan Roach included, and myself. I'll be speaking to the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we wanted to talk to you about managing compliance in Texas. And it's really interesting because there are so many districts of different types across Texas. Jonathan and I just had the privilege of going all through the state and meeting with so many different kinds, whether it was SUDS or MUDS or ESD or a library district, like we met with Bainbrook and others. And Jonathan has been terrific in really getting districts to work together on the issues that matter. And one of the things that came up is, hey, how do we be compliant in terms of our websites in Texas? So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk a little bit about this and talk about how he thinks about Texas and compliance. Because Jonathan, your firm basically represents districts across the state, right?
Yes, that's correct, Mac. And thanks for the quick introduction. Yeah, my firm, we do represent primarily water districts, but we work with a few fire districts, library districts. I wasn't even aware until about 18 months ago that there were so many different types of districts in Texas, 39 to be exact, different types of districts, and almost 4,000 throughout the state. Interestingly, in getting to work with so many different folks across the state, we realize that a lot of people do have websites, but a lot of those websites aren't necessarily in compliance. And some of that is because it's been a bit of a revolving door in terms of the requirements and how the legislature has piecemealed together what's required to be on a Texas government entity website. Um, Before I dive into that too much further, I just want to acknowledge the folks who have joined. Thank you, everybody, for your time this morning and attention. I do recognize a few names, so to those of you who know me and vice versa, good to see you again. Um, Thank you to Mac and Streamline for hosting this, and we certainly hope everybody gains something and some knowledge you can take back to your districts. At the end of this, we'll provide a sort of a checklist that hopefully you can use to visit with your web host, that you can use on your own to go through your own website. Something that's very simple that we had actually put together for our clients several years ago, but then Mac and his team prettied it up a little bit, and hopefully, again, that will be a useful tool for everybody as we go forward. But, before we look ahead, I'd like to take a step backwards. I mentioned a minute ago that so much of the requirements for websites in Texas has been a piecemealed approach. And really, that goes back almost 20 years now to some of the first mandates for government entity and special purpose district websites in about 2007. In 2007, the Health and Safety Code was amended to require that districts report their annual electricity usage and cost. And it was funny in 2007, I remember specifically that there were so many folks in the special district industry that all of a sudden were scrambling to figure out, okay, now we have to provide this information. It's got to go on a website. Does that mean we actually have to have a website? And interestingly enough, although the statute that was amended required the information to be publicly available, including as an option on a website, it didn't mandate that websites be provided for any special districts. I'll go through a few other amendments over the years, but even as it stands today, there's no formal mandate that requires a website to be hosted by a district. There's information that has to be out there on some website somewhere. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as it stands right now, special districts are not required to have their own website. So 2007 was the first time really the legislature touched on all of that. Fast forward to about 2015, and they amended the Open Meetings Act. I think everybody on this call is probably very intimately familiar with the Open Meetings Act. Most of us have had to go through the Open Meetings Act training that the Attorney General's office provides, and they started mandating that agendas go up on a website. So if you have a website, your agenda has to be there. They've changed that now to where minutes also are required to be there. So some of those changes came into effect in the 2019 legislative session. 2019 was a pretty sweeping reform across the board. In 2019, the legislature adopted SB 2, Senate Bill 2. It was really a tax transparency act. It required that a lot of financial information about special districts be made available publicly, and that did specifically include on a website. Again, it doesn't have to be a district-hosted website, but there does have to be a very detailed list of financial related information. So budgets, tax rates, prior tax rates, again, all kinds of tax and financial information now has to be on a publicly available website. The workaround that we found a lot of districts have done over the years is they'll provide that information either on their tax assessor's website, maybe their bookkeeper's website. So for, again, the districts that don't have a website, there are some workarounds to provide that information, but it does have to be out there on the World Wide Web somewhere. Continuing on, 2019, there was also a change to some lobbying reports. So for those districts out there that have hired lobbyists, advocates that go advocate for their position in Austin, there are some lobby reports that are required to be posted. And then again, in 2021, pretty significant change with House Bill 1154. 1154 was really kind of a reaction to SB 2. It filled in some blanks and added some additional requirements, but it also now includes a lot of reporting information on district elections. So when your next election cycle is, which directors' terms are ending, and who's up for election. Very specific information about how to get a hold of your district. So contact information, addresses, phone numbers, emails, things like that. So 1154 is pretty comprehensive as well. And so again, with the last almost now 20 years, you can see how the legislature has piecemealed together all of these different various requirements. And what's made it challenging, certainly from my perspective as an attorney, and I would imagine a lot of the meeting participants as district representatives, where do we go to find all that information? Well, it's not easy. Some of it's in the health and safety code, some of it's in the local government code, some of it's in the government code, some of it's in the water code if you're a water district. And so, again, really appreciate Mac and some of the folks who have been instrumental in trying to bring together the experts and the resources and really to provide something that is tangible that you guys, the callers, and really districts throughout the state can sink their teeth into and get a better understanding of what actually is required for a district website. So that's kind of the history. That's kind of where we've been. And then, Mac, I appreciate you putting that checklist there. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through kind of where we are. And so all those various statutory amendments and the different requirements, we've tried to streamline, pun intended, Mac, into this central resource that we hope will be a good tool for you guys going forward. And you can see, and I'll just touch on some of the requirements there. Meeting notices and agendas, we talked about that. You know, statutorily, you have to post those 72 hours, some cases more, depending on the type of district. But meeting notices do have to go on a website if you have one. Same with minutes. So copy of your minutes, your meeting record, that's required to be posted now. You can see the board member positions there, name, position, what their term is, how to get a hold of them. One of the things that we do as a firm, and this is really up to each individual district, but there's not a requirement that somebody's personal contact information be included on a website. So if you're an elected official, you can actually opt out of having any of your personal information provided to the public. So your home address, your home phone number, your personal email address, you can opt out of having that disclosed, but your website does still have to provide a mechanism for somebody to get a hold of you. There's some drop-down menus and other things that we've seen some web hosts get creative and make sure that that's complied with. But election information, you can see the next section there. So anything related to your upcoming election, dates, times, locations, deadlines to file for candidacy. There's actually a form that the Secretary of State came out with in response to House Bill 1154 in 2021. That's a fairly simple kind of fill in the blank. Here's everything related to your election that has to be posted on a website. That information is incorporated into the section here, but again, you know, the SOS, Secretary of State, tried to provide at least some guidance for all the districts out there that do have websites. The next section there on the checklist is really primarily for water districts, municipal utility districts, and some of the others. Some of those come directly out of the water code provisions that apply, again, primarily to water districts. But you can see things like an annual water quality report, drought contingency plan, notice to purchaser, and district information form. Anybody in the water world probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody not in the water world, don't worry about it. It doesn't apply to you. If you're a fire district, hospital district, mosquito district, library district, some of those additional reporting there in that middle pink section don't apply. The next section down was really the biggest response, again, in SB2 and House Bill 1154, the last several legislative sessions. So that's where you can see a lot of that additional financial and district type information. So what is the district? Who is the district? Who are the representatives? If you have a general manager, that's got to be posted. Your district operator and tax assessor information about them and how to get a hold of them. That information now has to be on a website, really with the idea being with a website, you should be providing the public with the information they need to know what the district is, basic information about it, and the right folks to ask questions to. So if you have a question about your water bill, you'd reach out to your operator. If you have a question about your tax bill, regardless of the type of district you are, you should be able to get a hold of the district's tax assessor. So you can see why some of those key contacts are included as requirements. On down the list, district finances. Again, that was a pretty sweeping change. Previously, you had to include at least a copy of your audit, but now you've got to include your audit along with all this other financial information like your current budget, last 2 years of budgets, any changes in budget. So percent and dollar amount over last year to this year now has to be posted and included on a website. On to the next page, Mac. And I won't bore everybody to death here. Tax revenues, tax rates, and some of the others related to conflicts disclosures, lobbying contracts, I mentioned that one, and then again that annual metered usage and utility costs. That's really a comprehensive checklist. There may be some nuances depending on the type of district. So I know, for example, fire districts have to have something posted that's a little bit more specific to them, kind of like that middle section with the water districts, but I think that's a good checklist and kind of an overall tool. Happy to answer any questions at the end, but I'm going to turn over to Mac here in a minute. But before I do, I just want to kind of leave everybody with this thought, and it dovetails into what Mac's going to present on the ADA compliance, whole nother set of rules that now we're all, regardless of district type, going to have to comply with in relatively short order. But it's a quote from a former U.S. Deputy Attorney General who said, "You think compliance is expensive? Try non-compliance." And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more, and Mac may touch on this, but actual special purpose districts and other government entities who, in reviewing their websites, somebody has latched on to the fact that they're not in compliance, and that somebody could be a member of the public who's just trying to get information. It could be the Attorney General's office. It could be the Secretary of State, but it is very real. And just to highlight that, there are two specific examples just in the last few years. So 2 years ago, there were 35 school districts across the state of Texas who were tagged by the Secretary of State for election law violations. Again, there are campaign finance reports that have to be posted. At least 35 school districts didn't have that information included on their website, and the Secretary of State tagged them on it. Another one more recently, and I think what Mac has here is there are 4 Texas election websites specifically about recent elections that the U.S. Department of Justice came down and ruled, and those were actually county elections. Colorado, Runnels Smith, and Upton, I believe, who the DOJ, the U.S. Department of Justice, had to issue letters admonishing them for not complying with the website posting requirements. So it's becoming more and more real, and as we move over into the ADA compliance part, Mac's going to talk about, again, you'll hear just how real that's getting with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully that was informative, and Mac, thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for all the background. And you know, it's interesting. The Americans with Disabilities Act is not something that we think about intuitively. Like what we know when we have a building, that a building has to have a wheelchair ramp. But what about a website? How do you make it accessible for a user who's blind? Or maybe make a video, be sure to have closed captioning if they're deaf. It is definitely one of the things that, you know, we have to think about and understand. And so there's how many of you, like by show of hands, you can raise your hand in this webinar functionality. How many of you are familiar with ADA compliance for district websites? I'm just curious here. Okay, Stacy is. Let's see. Everyone else is like, I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm going to go nice and slow on this. So I'll start with the why. This is really important. You're a public entity, you're serving your community, and it's important. You want to make sure that everybody can actually access this information. Now, any guesses, you can guess in chat, what percentage of the public has a disability that would affect their ability to use a website? Any guesses in percentages? 5%, 10%? Go ahead and write it in chat. And then Annalise, will you read out the ones that come through on chat? Okay, Michelle's guessing 5%. Come on, I know. Okay, Elvira guessed 25. Well, Elvira's actually closer. Rachel's guessing 10. Okay, Erica Santa Maria guessed it right. It's 20%. Okay, Michael thinks 30%. Well, it's roughly 15 to 20% of the public actually has some type of disability. And if you think about it, like if I have to hold up my phone like this, I got to squint to read something, that's an accessibility issue with a website where the font wasn't big enough. And we've seen this before. I think we've all experienced, and some people can, become a member of this community instantly. So it's really important to make sure that everybody can read and access your content. So there's some other reasons too, like transparency, of course, compliance, of course, improved user experience and reputation. So all of these things are so important. Now, it's interesting. There's some new laws coming out at the federal level. The Department of Justice just released Rule 28 CFR Part 35, which is basically some new specific guidance applying specifically to special districts. And this applies to every special district in the country. And in April of 2027, they're going to begin enforcing these standards for what a website needs to have in terms of disability accommodations. Now, there are a lot of laws. The foundation of this little chart is the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is the foundation that basically ensures equal access and rights. But as you climb up the pyramid through Section 508, different state laws, the standards that we really care about are these WCAG standards, WCAG 2.1 AA. As a public organization, the AA standard, there's like single A, AA, and AAA. The AA standards are the gold standards. And what's really nice, if you take away anything from this graphic, is if you achieve these AA standards at the top, you actually therefore meet all of these standards. And we personally like the WCAG standards because they're really easy to understand and they're testable. So we can actually check our website against these. And we're going to encourage you to do that today. I'm going to leave you with some information on how to do that. It's pretty cool. All right. So just some trends we wanted to go over. So what's interesting about the Americans with Disabilities Act is that it was created in the 90s, in 1990, under the former Bush administration. And it had the ability for private remedy, meaning that anybody could take anybody to court for an ADA violation. So it didn't require a part of any department of the government to enforce it because any private party could enforce it. Now, that's bad news as a district because anybody can take you to court and say, hey, you're not ADA compliant. So here's what's kind of interesting about that. 90% of the cases in the United States, now there were 3,862 actions that actually went into federal court, which is a lot. This does not include all the ones that settled. 90% of them were filed by 10 firms. So these firms are like very good at just firing off the letter, demanding money. And you know what? They've been hassling some of our districts. That's why we bring this to you. Now, 77% of the cases actually targeted entities under 23 million. This is a total change in strategy. They used to go after deep pockets. So it's kind of alarming that now they're going after smaller entities because the bigger entities now are up to speed on the ADA stuff. But if you take a small local district in Texas, they're not as up to speed on this. Now, WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, these custom coded websites, these are the ones that are most targeted by the lawsuits. They comprise 51% of the actions. And interestingly enough, I think some of you have probably seen these accessibility widgets on websites, the little universal disability sign to sort of help. Actually, nearly a quarter of all the actions were filed against websites that had this because it does not actually solve the problem of accessibility. It can maybe do some things to make it nicer, but it ultimately doesn't solve the problem. And I think what's sad, we saw this happen in Colorado where they had HB 211110 go into effect earlier this year. A lot of people just took down content. They just had kind of the digital equivalent of a book burning and just sort of gave up on being transparent to the public. And that's definitely not what we want to see. I wrote this article that appeared in a newspaper in Colorado that kind of talked about this, and that we shouldn't be, sacrificing transparency for compliance. So there's a couple things we're going to be watching. We're going to be watching how the DOJ begins enforcing this. We're going to look at technologies, how it makes it easier. We're going to look at who's responsible. So like when right now, like the agencies are paying for this. Like if they have a website provider build them a site and there's some issues with it, the agency themselves are paying to settle. They're 95% of the time they're settling out of court. And this has happened. I've talked to districts in Texas who have paid thousands of dollars to have to deal with this. And the transparency, are people going to give up and just say, well, if I'm not required to have a website in Colorado or in Texas, why am I even bothering with this? The answer is no. It's so important that you have a website. It's so important that your community knows what you're doing. So we don't want to see that happen, but this is definitely coming up. So now let's talk about some strategies you have to manage compliance. The one thing I wanted to show you that I think is really cool is this tool. It's called checkmydistrict.org. And we built this for you because we were so tired of people hassling special districts in Texas. So what this will do, this was built with the National Coalition, with Jonathan's team, and the Special Districts Association in Colorado, Oregon, Florida. We all got together and we built a tool so you can actually test your own website. So you put it in for free. You don't end up on any spam lists or anything. And what's really cool is if we do, here, I'll pull up an example report. So it will give you this really nice report. It'll show you your current accessibility and risk snapshot. It'll actually break down all the issues that are on your website that might be causing issues. And then it'll, and it's cool, like it'll even break down each one. And what you can do, you don't have to be technical. I guarantee you didn't get into the special district space because you loved HTML. That's fine. That's for Jonathan and I to worry about. But this is a report that you can share and send off to your web developer, and they can get to work on making sure that you're compliant. So be sure to check this out. It's a pretty cool tool. And it's definitely one of the things that I would love to leave you with. So with that, I just kind of wanted to show you some of the technology strategies. And also, there's more ways we can dive into if we have time, if you're interested. But for now, I think it would be great to move on to the Q&A and open it up to folks who are on the call today and hear what your questions are about staying compliant in Texas. And with that, we'll open it up. Annalise will jump in and ask questions that are being brought by the audience. And then Jonathan and I will answer. Okay, we'll give him a minute. So an interesting quiz question is, what is the average settlement and remediation for ADA suits in 2024? I think we had data from the insurers in 2023, but it was according to the white paper in the National Association of Special Districts, and the average cost to the district was over $30,000. We were blown away by the expense, and it's just by the time you get the attorneys in, you fix the site, everything else it was expensive. So yeah, ADA is definitely the thing to watch for in all of that.
And Mac, I can tell you, while hopefully folks are formulating some questions, that goes back to that Attorney General quote that you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. So if you're a district and you happen to get wrapped up in one of these ADA compliance suits, it can get very expensive very quickly. And certainly from a legal perspective, that scares me a little bit. So I appreciate the resources that you're putting together. One of the things that we're now advising a lot of our clients is keep in mind that the ADA requirements are now somewhat super technical, but there is some time to comply with an April for special purpose districts anyway, April 2027 deadline to get your website in compliance. And so I don't want people to go running scared because of how technical the requirements are, because of that $30,000 non-compliance price tag or whatever the case may be. But certainly visit with your legal counsel, with your web and communication consultants. There are ways that you can get into compliance, and we certainly have some time to get it done.
Yeah. So our first question is from Stacy. Is there a cost to the assessment we can do online? And no, actually, Stacy, the Check My District is free. It's for you. We built it because we were so annoyed. There was a few companies that were basically calling districts and saying, hey, your site's not compliant. And they would send them this, big bloody report card. But then the districts would say, well, what's wrong with it? And then they said, well, we can't send it to you unless you pay. And then people would contact us. Streamline, provides website services and a platform for districts. And so we would then hear, well, they say something's not right with our website platform, but they won't tell us what it is. And so we got so sick of that we built a tool that does that for free for districts. So they have that. And we worked with the National Coalition to roll that out. So no, Stacy, it's completely free. So you don't have to worry about that for that specific reason. All right. We have Elvira raising their hand. So Annalise, will you unmute Elvira so they can ask the question?
Yes.
Oh, Stacy, you got an email like that. That's interesting. Yeah, it's great to have that. All right, Elvira, you can unmute and ask your question. All right. While we're waiting for Elvira to unmute,
It looks like Elvira sent a message in the chat here. It said, I ran a report to NCR overall accessibility score is an 84, but it says we failed. They're unsure what that means.
Okay. Yes. So Elvira, this is not uncommon. So 84 is actually a much better score than I've seen some districts. It's not uncommon. Unfortunately, the thing with ADA compliance is any issues detected are issues. So it's kind of a mean grader. It's not like, where they say B's get degrees or whatever. It's definitely one of the things where you don't want to have any known issues for users with disabilities. But the reality is, perfect is hard to achieve. So what you want to do is you just want to make a process where you're running these every month. And what's nice about Check My District is it'll send you a new one every month. And you just want to get it going where you want to send that report over to your web provider and then have them begin working on it. And you just want to have a process in place. So if there is an issue that comes up, you say, look, I've been running my scans every month. We've been working to resolve these issues. And, we started at an 84, but now we're at a 96, and we're just waiting to resolve the last few issues. That is a very responsible, awesome position to be in, and you're trending toward that full compliance. And so that's the best thing you can do, is to know your situation and improve your situation with respect to accessibility. And again, yep, so 84, don't be discouraged on your first scan for it to be 84. That's not a problem. And then we'll get more in depth on the ADA requirements, but we just want to get you started so you're aware and you're beginning to check. All right, thanks so much, Elvira. Let's see, Richard Spurlock asked, you mentioned minimum requirements for information publication if you do not have a website. What are those? Okay, I'll turn that over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, Richard. And again, you are not required, at least not yet, not required to have a website. We'll be monitoring that into the next year with the 2025 legislative session. There seems to be a push every session to mandate websites. We're not there yet. May or may not happen next session. But it's a good question because for those districts who don't have a website, there are still mandatory posting requirements. And so if you saw the URL that I think Annalise posted, that has a link to the checklist that we went through. If you go down to the financial reporting section, it's got the green tag at the top, and it's got the information about the district, the key contacts, the district finances, the audit, your tax revenues, your tax rates, so all that financial reporting. Those are the required elements, and that's where, again, we've seen districts who don't have a website. They will usually defer to one of their consultants, a tax assessor, or somebody who can post that information. If you want to get into the real detailed specifics, I can refer you to the tax code. It's tax code 26.18 generally is where a lot of those financial reporting requirements can be found. So it's Texas Tax Code 26.18. You'll see most of those outlined from that financial reporting section on the checklist in the code section there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and huge props to Jonathan and his team for hunting down all of the different provisions. I mean, Jonathan, it looks like you drew from like 8 different parts of various codes and things we didn't even know existed. We as Streamline try to help and go in there and make sure that, we find some of the laws. And I think we found maybe half of them. And then Jonathan and his team had found every little nook and cranny of the law that applied to districts in Texas. So grateful.
Yeah, it's definitely been a collaborative effort, and hopefully everybody on the call also will realize that, don't feel like there's one central resource that you're going to have to go to. It really does take a village. Funny enough, that's actually how I met Streamline and realized that there's a whole wide world of districts out there beyond just our client base and some of the water districts. Is we got one of those emails Mac was talking about with the "Is your website compliant?" And I thought, again, as the attorney, well, I don't know the answer to that, and I feel like I should know the answer to that. So I started running those tests on my district's websites and realized, well, folks, we got some work to do. So Mac, thank you for that resource for all of us. It's certainly been a big benefit for our clients and hopefully to everybody else on the call.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it looks like we've gotten through the questions. Stacy said, yes, they did get an email like that as well. They appreciate the assessment y'all have created so that we can pass it on to our website coordinator. Absolutely. Stacy, we're so glad. And Jonathan and I are here to help. We love serving special districts. That's all we work with. So if you've got legal questions, send them to Jonathan. If you've got technical questions with your website, send them to me. If you've got stuff on your Check My District report that you don't understand and you want me to work with your engineers or developers, I'm happy to do that. We'll make sure to get you compliant. If you're interested in legal services for your district, of course, be sure to contact Jonathan Roach. If you're interested in a different platform for your website, that is actually fully indemnified. So we'll actually protect you against any legal claims for compliance with respect to ADA. Streamline's there to help. But more than anything, the reason that we work exclusively with special districts is that we love what you do for your community, and we think that you need to tell your story more. If more communities even understood that they had districts and all the great things they do. I know I live in a municipal utility district and I pay 30% less for my power than my friends that live out in other parts of this area. And it's so awesome that we have that. And we just want to see you thrive. We know you have limited resources. We know you have to do more with less. So if there's any way that we can help you stay lean and efficient, that's what we're here to do. So thank you for taking the time this morning to focus on your compliance, to better serve your community. And if Jonathan and I can do anything else to make your jobs easier, let us know.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.
All right. Take care. Bye.